I have no desire for intimacy, my wife said. I got up and left. Her best friend said, "Hey, wait. My name is Marcus Ellis, and I'm 41 years old, though some days I feel like I've aged a decade in the past few years alone. 13 years of marriage taught me something nobody warns you about when you're standing at that altar, all starry-eyed and convinced you've got it all figured out. Love doesn't always fade with screaming matches or dramatic exits. Hell, that might actually be easier to deal with. No, the real killer is when love just slips away in the silence between words you stopped saying and touches that stopped meaning anything. I remember when Danielle used to laugh at my dumb jokes, and I mean really laugh, not that polite chuckle she gives me now when I try too hard to be funny. Back then, she'd double over at my stupid impressions of her coworkers or the way I'd narrate what our dog was thinking in some ridiculous voice. She used to text me random sweet stuff in the middle of her workday. Nothing earth-shattering, just little reminders that I was on her mind. Thinking about you, or can't wait to see your face tonight, or even just a picture of something random that made her think of me. Those texts were like little shots of warmth straight to my chest. And God, our road trips. We used to plan these epic adventures, sometimes just driving 3 hours to check out some hole-in-the-wall diner she'd found on Yelp, or heading up to the mountains for the weekend with nothing but a cooler full of beer and a playlist we'd spend hours perfecting. She'd navigate while I drove, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. She'd put her hand on my thigh while I was driving, not in some sexual way, just because she wanted to touch me, just because I was her person and she wanted that connection. Back then, I was enough. More than enough. I was her choice, her safe harbor, her favorite person to spend time with. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with this expression that made me feel like I could conquer the damn world. Like I was exactly who she needed me to be, exactly when she needed it. Now I'm just the guy who pays the bills and keeps the house from falling apart. I'm the one who notices when we're out of milk and remembers to schedule the oil changes and fixes the dripping faucet that's been driving her crazy for weeks. I sit beside her on the couch while she scrolls through her phone, and it's like I'm furniture. Useful furniture, sure, but about as emotionally significant as the coffee table. For the longest time, I told myself this was just what happened, that this was normal, mature love, that the butterflies and constant connection were just honeymoon phase stuff that naturally fades when real life kicks in. I read articles about how relationships evolve, how couples have to work to maintain intimacy after years together, how it's normal for things to get comfortable and routine. I bought into all of it because the alternative, that something fundamental was dying between us, was too terrifying to face head-on. But deep down, in that quiet place where you can't lie to yourself no matter how hard you try, I knew something was wrong. Something was withering away, and I seemed to be the only one who gave a damn about trying to save it. I was the guy doing CPR on a relationship that had flatlined, while she just watched. Maybe even wished I'd stopped trying so hard. It's a special kind of lonely, being married to someone who seems to barely tolerate your presence. Not hate. That would almost be easier to understand. Just this constant, low-level irritation, like I'm a mosquito buzzing around her head that she can't quite swat away. Every attempt I made to reconnect felt like I was bothering her, interrupting something more important. Every joke fell flat. Every gesture went unnoticed or got met with this exhausted sigh that made me feel about 2 inches tall. I started watching other couples when we'd go out, wondering if they were faking it or if they actually still enjoyed each other's company. I'd see them laughing together, touching casually, looking at each other like they actually liked what they saw, and I'd feel this ache in my chest. When did Danielle stop looking at me like that? When did I become the obligation instead of the choice? The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement that anything had changed. If I brought up feeling disconnected, she'd brush it off with "we're fine," or "you're being dramatic." If I suggested we needed to work on things, she'd act like I was crazy for thinking there was a problem. It was like living in some alternate reality where I was the only one who noticed that we'd become strangers sharing a mortgage and a Netflix account. But I stayed. Of course I stayed. Because that's what you do when you made a promise, right? You don't bail when things get tough. You don't give up on someone you love just because they stopped loving you back the same way. You keep trying, keep hoping, keep believing that somehow you'll find your way back to each other, even when your soul feels like it's starving to death. Look, I'm not some hopeless romantic who expected our marriage to be like a damn Nicholas Sparks movie forever. I wasn't looking for fireworks shooting off every time we kissed or some epic, sweeping passion that would make the neighbors complain. Hell, I would have settled for basic human warmth at that point. All I wanted, all I really needed, was to feel like I existed in her world as more than just the guy who handled the boring stuff. I wasn't asking for much, just to feel seen, to feel like when she looked at me, she actually saw Marcus, the man she chose to marry, instead of just scanning me like I was part of the household inventory. But every single gesture I made, every attempt to bridge the growing gap between us, felt like I was reaching across some invisible canyon that kept getting wider no matter how hard I stretched. I'd get up early on Saturday mornings and make her favorite breakfast, those fancy blueberry pancakes with the lemon zest that take forever to get right. I'd bring it to her in bed with fresh coffee, exactly how she likes it, thinking maybe this would be the morning she'd smile at me the way she used to. Instead, she'd barely look up from her phone, mumble a distracted thanks, and keep scrolling through whatever social media rabbit hole she'd fallen into. It was like I'd become invisible, like my efforts were just expected background noise in her life. I'd run her a bath after she'd had a particularly rough day at work, complete with those expensive bath salts she loved and candles around the tub. I'd tell her it was ready, and she'd go use it. But there was never any acknowledgement that I'd thought about her comfort, that I'd taken time out of my evening to do something nice for her. It was just another item on her checklist of things that happened in the house, like the dishwasher running or the mail getting delivered. The shoulder rubs were probably the worst part. She'd complain about being tense, about her neck hurting from hunching over her laptop all day, so I'd move behind her chair and start working out the knots. My hands would find those familiar spots where she always carried her stress, and I'd try to help her relax. But instead of melting into my touch the way she used to, she'd go rigid. Her whole body would tense up like my hands were unwelcome intruders, and after maybe 2 minutes, she'd shrug me off with some excuse about needing to finish something important. Every single touch from me was met with resistance. Not aggressive pushing away, but this subtle, constant withdrawal that made me feel like I was somehow wrong for wanting physical connection with my own wife. A hand on her lower back, when I'd pass behind her in the kitchen, would make her step forward, out of reach. Trying to hold her hand while we walked would result in her suddenly needing to dig through her purse for something urgent. Even something as innocent as brushing her hair away from her face would make her flinch like I'd startled her. One night, after we'd gone nearly 3 weeks without any meaningful physical contact, I finally worked up the courage to say something. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, this massive space between us that might as well have been the Grand Canyon, and I just couldn't take the silence anymore. "I miss us," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd intended. She didn't even pause her show, just kept staring at the TV like I hadn't spoken at all. When I said her name to get her attention, she finally looked at me with this expression of mild annoyance, like I was interrupting something important. "It's not you," she said, her tone flat and emotionless. "I'm just tired. Just tired." That was her explanation for why my wife had become a stranger. That was supposed to make me feel better, I guess, knowing that it wasn't personal. But tired turned into weeks of the same cold shoulder, then months. And somewhere along the way, I realized that tired had become her permanent state when it came to me. I started pulling back then, not to punish her or play some stupid game, but purely as self-defense. Reaching out to someone day after day and getting pushed away, ignored, or treated like you're bothering them, that does something to a man's soul. It chips away at your sense of worth until you start wondering if maybe you really are as annoying and unwanted as her reactions make you feel. I stayed because I loved her. God help me. I stayed because some foolish part of me still believed that the woman I married was buried somewhere under all that indifference, waiting to come back to me. But I also started wondering if she even liked me anymore, let alone loved me. Because when someone consistently treats your affection like an inconvenience, you can't help but feel like you've become the ghost haunting your own marriage. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help. You know how sometimes you get so caught up in the routine of your daily life that you forget who you are together? I figured if I could just get Danielle away from all the distractions. Her job stress, the endless pile of laundry, the never-ending stream of Netflix shows that seemed more interesting to her than actual conversation. Maybe we'd remember what we used to have. So I planned this weekend getaway. Nothing fancy or over the top, just a cozy little cabin I found online about 2 hours north of the city. The pictures showed this rustic place nestled in the woods with a stone fireplace, a hot tub on the deck, and these huge windows that looked out over the mountains. It was exactly the kind of spot where we used to love spending time back when we actually enjoyed each other's company. I handled all the details myself because, let's be honest, asking Danielle to help plan something romantic felt like setting myself up for disappointment. I packed our bags, stocked the cooler with her favorite wine and those expensive cheeses she likes. Even remembered to bring the playlist we used to listen to on our road trips back when music was something we shared instead of fought over. The drive up there was promising at first. She seemed relaxed for the first time in weeks, actually commenting on the scenery instead of being buried in her phone. We stopped at this little farm stand that was selling fresh apple cider, and for a brief moment, when she laughed at something the old farmer said about city folks, I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. But that feeling lasted about as long as it took us to get to the cabin and unpack our stuff. The moment we walked through the door, it was like someone had flipped a switch. She immediately found the Wi-Fi password and parked herself on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through the same social media feeds she'd been glued to at home. All that beautiful scenery outside the windows, all that peace and quiet I'd hoped would bring us together, and she was right back to living in that little digital world where I apparently didn't exist. I tried to stay positive, made us drinks, suggested we take a walk around the property before it got dark, pointed out the deer I could see grazing at the edge of the tree line. She'd nod and make these little agreeable sounds, but her eyes never left that damn screen. It was like she was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely, probably reading about other people's lives instead of trying to improve her own. That evening, I got a fire going in the fireplace. Took me forever because I'm not exactly an outdoorsy guy, but I was determined to create the kind of romantic atmosphere that might remind her why she'd married me in the first place. The flames were dancing, casting these warm shadows around the room, and I'd opened that bottle of wine she loved. The whole scene was straight out of a romantic movie, exactly the kind of setting where couples reconnect and remember what they mean to each other. She spent most of it texting. I'm not even exaggerating. While I'm sitting there watching the fire and trying to think of ways to start a real conversation, she's got her phone tilted away from me, fingers flying across the screen like she's having the most fascinating discussion of her life with someone who isn't her husband. The soft clicking of her nails against the glass was the only sound in the room besides the crackling wood. When I finally worked up the nerve to say something, to try to salvage what was supposed to be our romantic evening, she barely acknowledged me. I moved over to sit closer to her on the couch, close enough that I could smell her perfume, close enough that in the old days she would have curled up against my side without thinking about it. "This is nice," I said, trying to sound casual instead of desperate. "Just us, no distractions." She made this little humming noise that could have meant anything, still not looking up from her phone. That's when I reached for her hand. Not in some demanding, possessive way, just a simple gesture of connection. The kind of touch that used to be automatic between us, natural as breathing. My fingers had barely brushed against hers when she pulled away like I'd tried to grab a hot coal. "Can you not?" she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "I just want to be left alone. Just want to be left alone." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Here we were, in this beautiful place I'd chosen specifically to bring us closer together, and she wanted to be left alone. Not left alone to relax or decompress, but left alone from me, from her own husband's touch. I didn't say anything back. What could I say? That I'd driven 2 hours and spent money we didn't really have to spare just so she could ignore me in a different location? That I'd been hoping for one evening where I didn't feel like a stranger in my own marriage? That her casual rejection felt like she'd just told me I was worthless? Instead, I just stared into those flames and felt something inside me burn out just as quietly as the embers would later that night. It wasn't anger, exactly, though maybe anger would have been healthier. It was more like resignation, like acceptance of a truth I'd been fighting against for months. That was the night I stopped hoping she'd come back to me emotionally. The night I realized that all my efforts, all my planning and trying and reaching out, weren't going to magically fix whatever had broken between us. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. Still, I stayed for the rest of the weekend. Still slept in the same bed, still made breakfast, still pretended like everything was fine. Because that's what men do, right? We push through the pain, swallow the rejection, keep showing up even when our soul is starving for something our partner seems incapable of giving, even when we're dying inside. It was a Thursday evening in late October, one of those unremarkable weeknights that blends into every other unremarkable weeknight when you're living in a marriage that's slowly suffocating you. I remember it was Thursday because Danielle always watched her crime shows on Thursdays, some detective series about cold cases that she followed religiously. She'd curl up on her end of the couch with a blanket, completely absorbed in other people's mysteries while remaining completely uninterested in solving the one happening right in our own living room. I'd been thinking about having this conversation for weeks, maybe months. Every time I worked up the courage to bring up what was happening between us, I'd lose my nerve at the last minute. Part of me was terrified of her response, but if I'm being honest, an even bigger part of me was terrified that she wouldn't care enough to have a response at all. That my pain, my loneliness, my desperate need for connection would just bounce right off her like everything else I'd been trying to communicate. But that night, something felt different. Maybe it was the way she'd completely ignored me when I'd gotten home from work, not even looking up when I said hello. Maybe it was how she'd eaten the dinner I'd cooked in complete silence, scrolling through her phone between bites like I was just the hired help. Or maybe I'd just finally reached that breaking point where staying silent felt more unbearable than whatever might happen if I spoke up. She was settled into her usual spot, remote in one hand, phone in the other, completely in her element. The blue glow from the TV flickered across her face, and she looked so peaceful, so content in her little bubble of entertainment and digital distraction. For a moment, I almost chickened out. Why ruin her evening? Why force this conversation when she clearly just wanted to zone out and escape from reality? But then I thought about how many evenings I'd spent sitting on the other end of this same couch, feeling like a ghost in my own home, and I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that this was okay, that this was what marriage was supposed to feel like. I sat down beside her. Not too close, because I'd learned that invading her personal space was a sure way to get the conversation shut down before it started, but close enough that she'd know I was there. Close enough that she couldn't completely ignore me without making it obvious. Can we talk after this? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, non-threatening. Just a simple request between two people who were supposed to be partners in life. She didn't even pause the show, just grabbed the remote and hit the mute button with this heavy sigh that made it clear she viewed my need for communication as an inconvenience. When she finally turned to look at me, her expression was already defensive, like I'd accused her of something instead of just asking for a few minutes of her time. "What now?" she said, and those two words carried the weight of every conversation she didn't want to have, every problem she didn't want to acknowledge, every effort I'd made that she'd dismissed as me being needy or dramatic. The thing about reaching your breaking point is that it gives you a strange kind of clarity. All the careful words I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks just fell away, and what came out was the simple, honest truth of what was killing me. "I miss being close," I said. "I miss us." For a split second, I thought maybe she'd soften. Maybe she'd recognize the pain in my voice and remember that she used to care about my feelings. Maybe she'd realize that her husband was sitting there basically begging F. But she didn't hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. "I have no desire for intimacy," she said, her voice as flat and emotionless as if she was reading ingredients off a cereal box. "Not with you. Not with you." Those three words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. It wasn't just that she didn't want intimacy in general, which would have been devastating enough. It was specifically that she didn't want it with me. Her husband, the man she'd promised to love and cherish, who she'd chosen above everyone else in the world. She'd taken that choice back, apparently, and couldn't even be bothered to deliver the news with any kind of gentleness or regret. I sat there staring at her, waiting for her to realize what she'd just said, what she'd just done to me with that casual cruelty. Waiting for her to backtrack or explain or show some sign that she understood she'd just put a knife through the heart of our marriage. But she just looked back at me with this expression of mild annoyance, like I was a persistent salesman who wouldn't take no for an answer. The silence stretched between us, and I could hear the muted TV still playing her detective show, probably revealing which suspect was the killer while my own mystery was getting solved right there on the couch. The mystery of whether my wife still loved me, still wanted me, still saw me as anything more than an obligation. Case closed. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady like I'd just gotten off a boat after a long journey. My whole body felt strange, disconnected, like I was watching someone else move through the motions of what came next. I walked to our bedroom. Though I guess it had stopped being our bedroom the moment she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me, and pulled out the duffel bag I used for work trips. I packed methodically, not thinking about what I was taking or what I was leaving behind, just filling the bag with enough clothes and toiletries to get me through a few days. She never came to check on what I was doing, never asked where I was going or when I'd be back. The sound of her TV show resumed its normal volume while I was folding shirts, which told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. When I walked back through the living room with my bag, she glanced up briefly, and I thought maybe now she'd realize what was happening, what her words had set in motion. But she just turned back to her show like I was leaving for any other business trip. No yelling, no tears, no dramatic confrontation. Just the quiet sound of a marriage ending with a zipper being closed and footsteps heading toward the door. Sometimes the most important moments in your life happen without any fanfare at all. The response came back so fast, I wondered if she'd been staring at her phone for weeks, waiting for me to contact her. Like she'd been sitting there hitting refresh on our conversation thread every 5 minutes. Yes. Thank you. I'll be there. Thank you. Like I was doing her some kind of favor by giving her the chance to lie to my face again. Like this was some generous gift instead of what it actually was, her final performance review. I spent that night planning exactly how this was going to go. What I'd say, how I'd say it, what expression I'd wear when I showed her the screenshots. I practiced in Lucas's bathroom mirror until I could deliver my lines without my voice shaking, without any emotion leaking through that she could use against me. Uptown Cafe was perfect for what I had planned. Public enough that she couldn't make a scene without embarrassing herself, but not so crowded that we couldn't have a private conversation. Plus, it was neutral territory. Somewhere we'd never been together, so there wouldn't be any sentimental memories clouding my judgment or making me go soft at the crucial moment. I got there 20 minutes early, picked a table in the back corner where I could see the whole place, and ordered a black coffee I didn't really want. My hands were steady as I wrapped them around the warm mug, which surprised me. I'd expected to be nervous, maybe even emotional. Part of me thought I might still have feelings for her that would complicate things. But sitting there waiting for her, I felt nothing but cold determination. She walked in exactly at 3, and Jesus Christ, she'd really gone all out for this performance. Hair freshly done in those soft beachy waves I used to love running my fingers through after she'd spent an hour styling them. Makeup perfectly applied to highlight her cheekbones and make her eyes look bigger, more innocent. She was wearing that blue sundress with the tiny flowers. The one she'd worn on our second anniversary, the one she knew was my absolute favorite because I'd told her a dozen times how beautiful she looked in it. The whole thing was so calculated it almost made me laugh. She was still playing games, still trying to manipulate me even now, even after everything that had happened. Probably figured if she looked pretty enough, vulnerable enough, nostalgic enough, I'd forget why I was angry and take her back like some pathetic puppy who couldn't stay mad at his owner. She paused in the doorway, scanning the cafe until she spotted me. When our eyes met, she gave me this soft, hopeful smile that might have worked a month ago, back when I still thought she was capable of genuine emotion instead of just really good acting. She walked over slowly, like she was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Slid into the seat across from me with practiced grace, setting her purse down carefully and folding her hands on the table like she was posing for a photo. "Hi," she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. The same tone she used to use when she was trying to get out of trouble, like when she'd maxed out her credit card or forgotten to pay the electric bill. "Sienna," I replied, keeping my voice completely neutral. No warmth, no anger, nothing she could read or react to. "You look good," she continued, probably hoping for some kind of response that would give her an opening. "Really good. You've been working out again, haven't you? I can tell. It suits you." She was fishing, trying to get me to engage with small talk so she could work her way up to the bigger conversation. I just stared at her, let the silence stretch out until it got uncomfortable. Watched her fidget with her purse strap and glance around the cafe like she was looking for backup or an escape route. "Rowan," I know you're angry, she finally said when it became clear I wasn't going to make this easy for her. And you have every right to be. What I said in that video was horrible and cruel, and I didn't mean any of it. Not one word. Her voice was starting to shake now, right on cue. I was drunk, and the girls were being awful, egging me on, and I just said the first stupid thing that popped into my head. You know how I get when I'm drinking? I say things I don't mean. You've seen me do it before. She paused, waiting for me to jump in with some kind of reassurance or forgiveness. When I didn't, she kept going, voice getting more desperate. I've been going crazy without you. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just keep thinking about how badly I screwed up. My mom keeps asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell her because I can't explain how I could hurt the best thing that ever happened to me. Now the tears were starting to form in the corners of her eyes, perfectly timed. Please, baby, give me a chance to make this right. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I love you so much, and I know you love me too, despite everything. The performance was flawless. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't seen those screenshots, I might have actually believed her. The trembling lip, the way her voice cracked on, I love you. Even the single tear that rolled down her cheek, right on schedule. She'd probably practiced this whole speech in her own mirror. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened up the screenshots Jonah had sent me, and slid it across the table without saying a word. She looked down at the screen, and I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion as she tried to figure out what she was looking at, recognition when she realized what it was, panic as she understood the implications, and finally something that looked almost like relief. Like she was tired of pretending to be sorry. What is this? She asked, but her voice had already lost that soft, vulnerable quality. She knew exactly what it was. Your plan? I said simply. The whole thing. From start to finish. She stared at the phone for a long moment, scrolling through the screenshots with trembling fingers. I could see her reading her own words, remembering the conversations, probably trying to figure out which one of her friends had betrayed her. When she looked back up at me, the mask had completely fallen away. No more tears, no more innocent victim act. Just cold calculation staring back at me. Rowan, I can explain. No. I cut her off, standing up from the table. You can't. Because there's no explanation that makes this okay. You planned this whole thing. You sat in our kitchen, in our bed, planning how to destroy me, and then you executed it perfectly. I could see other customers starting to look our way, but I didn't give a shit. I'm not here for an apology or closure or whatever other bullshit you want to sell me. I just wanted you to know that I know. Your little game worked exactly like you wanted it to, except for one thing. What? She whispered. You thought I'd come crawling back. You thought I'd be so broken and desperate that I'd take you back no matter what you did to me. But guess what, Sienna? I'm not that guy anymore. And I'm definitely not your guy anymore. I dropped a $5 bill on the table for my untouched coffee and walked toward the door. Rowan, wait. I didn't look back. Didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing whatever emotion she was performing now. I just walked out of that cafe and out of her life, leaving her sitting alone with the evidence of her betrayal. Exactly like she'd left me. Walking out of that cafe felt like the final scene of a movie, dramatic, satisfying, complete. I'd said what I needed to say, delivered my knockout punch, and left Sienna sitting there with the wreckage of her lies. For about 48 hours, I felt like I'd won something. Like I'd reclaimed some piece of myself that she'd stolen. But then the adrenaline wore off, and I was back to just being a guy whose marriage had imploded in the most public way possible. The confrontation had given me closure, sure, but it didn't magically fix the fact that I was still sleeping on my best friend's couch, still dealing with the fallout of being married to a sociopath, still trying to figure out who the hell I was supposed to be now. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from someone I definitely wasn't expecting. Hey, this might seem random, but I heard about what happened with you and Sienna. I'm Adrielle. I've been dating Marcus from her office. Would you be up for grabbing coffee sometime? I think we might have some things to talk about. Adrielle. I vaguely remembered the name from a few work events Sienna had dragged me to. Tall, mixed-race woman with natural curls, and this really genuine laugh. She worked in marketing for some tech startup and was dating Marcus, the guy from Sienna's accounting department, who always wore bow ties and talked about craft beer like it was high art. My first instinct was to ignore the message. I'd just finished burning bridges with my ex-wife. Did I really need to get involved in whatever workplace drama Sienna had stirred up? But something about the way Adrielle had phrased it made me curious. We might have some things to talk about. Sounded less like gossip and more like she had actual information I needed to hear. Plus, I was going stir-crazy at Lucas's place. Between the gym, therapy, and my certification course, I had a routine going, but I was still living in this weird isolation bubble. Maybe talking to someone who'd witnessed Sienna's bullshit from the outside would help me make sense of things. So I texted back, "Sure. Tomorrow afternoon work for you." We met at Grind Coffee, this little independent place in the arts district that was always packed with freelancers and college students. Adrielle was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming mugs in front of her. She'd gotten me a black coffee without asking. Either a lucky guess or she'd done her homework. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to anyone connected to that whole situation." Honestly, I almost didn't respond, I admitted. But curiosity got the better of me. She laughed, and it was the same genuine sound I remembered from those office parties. Fair enough. I probably would have done the same thing if some random person reached out after my life exploded. There was something immediately comfortable about talking to Adrielle. No awkward small talk. No walking on eggshells around the elephant in the room. She dove right in. "So Marcus told me what really happened," she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "About the group chat, the planning, all of it. I wanted you to know that not everyone bought into Sienna's victim act." That caught me off guard. Marcus knew about the group chat? Not at the time. But after your little confrontation at the cafe, which, by the way, was apparently legendary, Sienna came into work the next day completely unhinged. Started telling anyone who'd listened that you'd ambushed her with fake screenshots and made a scene in public. Adrielle shook her head, looking disgusted. Marcus didn't buy it for a second. He'd watched her operate in the office for 2 years, seen how she manipulated situations to make herself look good. So he started asking around, and eventually Jonah spilled everything. Jesus, how many people know? More than you'd think. Turns out Sienna wasn't as subtle as she thought she was. People had noticed things, how she talked about you, how she acted when you weren't around. The TikTok was just the final piece of evidence everyone needed to see what was really going on. We talked for 2 hours, and it was the first time since this whole nightmare started that I felt like someone truly understood what I'd been through. Adrielle had her own stories about Sienna's manipulative behavior at work, how she'd throw co-workers under the bus to make herself look better, how she'd spread gossip and then play innocent when it caused drama. She tried to get Marcus fired last year, Adrielle told me, stirring sugar into her second cup of coffee. Told their boss that he was stealing client information and selling it to competitors. Complete bullshit, obviously, but it took Marcus weeks to clear his name. Why? I asked. What did Marcus ever do to her? He got promoted to a position she wanted. That was it. In Sienna's world, if you have something she wants, you become an enemy who needs to be eliminated. The more we talked, the more I realized how lucky I was to be out of that marriage. Sienna hadn't just been a bad wife. She was genuinely toxic, the kind of person who left destruction in her wake wherever she went. I'd been so focused on what was wrong with me, what I'd done to deserve her treatment, that I'd never considered the possibility that the problem was entirely hers. "Can I ask you something?" Adrielle said as we were getting ready to leave. "When you found out about the group chat, were you more hurt or more angry?" I thought about it for a minute. Angry, definitely. The hurt was already there from the video, but finding out it was premeditated, that made me furious. "Good," she said, standing up and grabbing her jacket. Hurt means you still cared about her opinion. Anger means you know you deserved better. We exchanged numbers and made plans to hang out again the following week. Nothing romantic. We were both clear about that. But it felt good to have someone in my corner who understood the situation without me having to explain every detail. As I drove back to Lucas's place, I realized something had shifted. For weeks, I'd been carrying around this sense of shame, like I was somehow responsible for what had happened to my marriage. Like if I'd been a better husband, more attractive, more successful, more whatever, Sienna wouldn't have felt the need to humiliate me. But talking to Adrielle had helped me see the truth. This was never about me. Sienna was a narcissist who'd used me as a convenient target for her own insecurities and manipulations. She would have done this to anyone who got in the way of what she wanted. I just happened to be the poor bastard who married her. That night, I opened up the Notes app on my phone and wrote something I'd been thinking about for days. Sometimes the betrayal is the beginning, not the end. It felt like the truest thing I'd written in months. Sienna's betrayal hadn't ended my life. It had started a new one. A better one. A life where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. Where I could be proud of who I was instead of constantly apologizing for existing. For the first time since this whole thing started, I was actually excited about my future. And I had a feeling Adrielle was going to be an important part of figuring out what that future looked like. 40 days. That's how long it's been since the TikTok that broke me. And I'm sitting here on my new balcony watching the sun come up over a city that feels completely different than it did 6 weeks ago. Same buildings, same streets, same coffee shops on every corner, but everything looks brighter somehow. Like someone adjusted the contrast on my entire life. I moved out of Lucas and Mina's place 2 weeks ago. Don't get me wrong. They were amazing, probably saved my sanity during those first few weeks when I was basically a walking shell of a human being. But there comes a point when you need to stop hiding and start living again. And that point came when I realized I was spending more time worrying about being a burden than actually healing. My new apartment is nothing fancy. A one-bedroom in a converted warehouse about 20 minutes from downtown. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that creak when you walk on them, and windows that let in so much light I don't need to turn on a lamp until evening. It's the first place that's ever been entirely mine, decorated with my stuff, arranged the way I want it, no compromises or negotiations required. The best part is the balcony. It's barely big enough for a chair and a small table, but it faces east, so I get the sunrise every morning. I've started drinking my coffee out there, just sitting in the quiet and watching the world wake up. It's become this ritual that grounds me, reminds me that I made it through another night, and I'm still here, still breathing, still moving forward. Sienna doesn't know where I live now. Hell, she probably doesn't even know I've moved, which is exactly how I want it. I've blocked her on every platform imaginable: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, even Venmo, because I knew she'd try to use payment requests as a way to contact me. My phone number is still changed, my social media presence has been completely rebuilt from scratch, and I've made it clear to everyone in my life that sharing information about me with her is a hard boundary I won't tolerate. It sounds extreme, but it's necessary, because the truth is, Sienna isn't done trying to control the narrative. Even now, 40 days later, she's still posting cryptic shit online about toxic relationships and learning to love yourself after being emotionally abused. Last week, she shared some quote about surviving narcissistic partners that made me laugh so hard I almost choked on my protein shake. The projection is unreal. But I guess when you're a master manipulator, admitting you're the problem isn't really an option. Easier to flip the script and paint yourself as the victim of the very behavior you spent months orchestrating. I know about her posts because Adrielle keeps me updated. We've become genuine friends over the past month, the kind of friendship that develops when you bond over surviving the same toxic person. She'll screenshot Sienna's latest attempts at revisionist history, and we'll text about how delusional it all is. It's therapeutic, actually, having someone who sees through the bullshit as clearly as I do. Marcus finally quit his job last week after Sienna tried to get him written up for creating a hostile work environment. Apparently, she claimed he was spreading rumors about her personal life and making her uncomfortable. The irony would be hilarious if it wasn't so predictable. Classic Sienna. When you can't control someone, you try to destroy them. But here's the thing that would probably blow her mind. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sitting around plotting revenge or hoping karma catches up with her. I'm just free. Free in a way I didn't even realize I wasn't before. My new job starts Monday. Senior software developer at a fintech startup downtown. 30% pay raise from my old position, and they're paying for me to finish my certification. The interview process was intense. 3 rounds, technical challenges, the whole 9 yards, but I crushed it. Turns out, when you're not constantly being told your ambitions are pointless, you can actually achieve some pretty cool stuff. I've been going to the gym religiously, and the transformation isn't just physical. Yeah, I'm in the best shape of my life. But more importantly, I feel strong again. Not just muscle-wise, but mentally. Like I can handle whatever gets thrown at me because I already survived the worst thing I could imagine. Dr. Anika, and I had our last session yesterday. Not because I'm cured or anything dramatic like that, but because I've reached the point where I'm not just surviving. I'm actually thriving. She said something that stuck with me. Rowan, you came in here thinking you needed to fix what was broken. But you weren't broken. You were just trapped in someone else's story about who you were supposed to be. That hit hard because it's so true. For 3 years, I'd been living my life according to Sienna's script, dressing how she wanted. Mariah shifted against my truck, her flip-flops scraping against the asphalt as she seemed to wrestle with something heavy in her mind. The way she was looking at me, like she was trying to decide whether to rip off a Band-Aid slowly or just yank it off all at once, made my stomach clench up with dread. Can I be honest? She asked, though her tone suggested she was going to be honest whether I wanted her to be or not. I nodded, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to roll up the window and drive away before she could say whatever was coming next. But I'd spent too many months living in denial, and I was finally ready to hear the truth, even if it was going to hurt like hell. She's been talking differently about you for over a year now, Mariah said, her voice gentle but unflinching. At first it was little things. Complaints that seemed normal, you know? But then it got meaner. The word meaner hit me like a punch to the gut. I could handle being called boring or predictable, but mean? What the hell had I done to deserve mean? She calls you too emotional, Mariah continued, ticking off items like she was reading from a shopping list. Too steady. Says you're always around, like that's somehow a bad thing in a marriage. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of everything I'd thought I knew about my relationship. Too emotional for wanting connection. Too steady for being reliable. Always around for being present in my own damn house. But the worst part, Mariah said, and I could tell this was the part she'd really been dreading, is that she says she misses feeling chased. Like, she wants to feel pursued, but not by you. She wants that excitement, that uncertainty, but from someone new. That stung worse than everything else combined. I'd been trying so hard to love her consistently, to be the safe harbor she could count on, and apparently what she really wanted was to feel like she was still single and available. Mariah's face grew even more serious, and I could tell she was about to drop another bomb on what was left of my understanding of my marriage. She glanced around the empty street, like she was worried someone might overhear what she was about to say, then leaned in closer to my truck window. There's this guy she keeps mentioning, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Derek, from her gym. My chest immediately tightened. The gym. Of course it was the gym. Danielle had started going there about 8 months ago, claiming she needed to get back in shape and feel better about herself. I'd been supportive, even encouraging, because I thought maybe if she felt better physically, it might help whatever was going wrong between us emotionally. What an idiot I'd been. At first, it seemed harmless, Mariah continued. Just casual mentions, you know? Derek showed me a new exercise today, or Derek says I'm getting stronger. But then it got more frequent. More personal. I could feel my jaw clenching as she talked. All those evenings when Danielle would come home from the gym glowing and energized in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I'd actually been happy about it. I'd thought the exercise was good for her mood, good for her confidence. I never considered that maybe someone else was responsible for that glow. She said once, if I were single, he'd be in trouble, Mariah said, and those words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. If I were single, not if I weren't married, or if things were different. If I were single, like being married to me was just an inconvenient technicality standing between her and what she really wanted. Like I was the obstacle, not the person she'd chosen to build a life with. Suddenly, everything started clicking into place with horrible clarity. The secretive phone habits that had developed over the past few months. The way she'd started dressing up for quick errands that used to be sweatpants occasions. Those girls' nights that never seemed to involve any of her usual friends when I asked about them later. The question that came out of my mouth next felt like it might kill me, but I had to ask it. I needed to know if there was anything left of the woman I'd married, any shred of the love that had once existed between us. Does she ever speak about me with love? I asked Mariah, my voice barely above a whisper. Mariah looked away then, staring down at her flip-flops like they held the secrets of the universe. That pause, that inability to meet my eyes, told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. She calls you reliable, she finally said, the words coming out slow and careful. Predictable, but not much more. Reliable. Predictable. Those were the words she used to describe the man she'd promised to love for better or worse. Not loving, not caring, not even likable. Just reliable, like I was a piece of household equipment that performed its function without requiring much thought or maintenance. "You're not wrong for wanting love, Marcus," Mariah said, and there was something fierce in her voice now, like she was angry on my behalf. "You're not needy. You were just loyal to someone who stopped choosing you." Those words hit me like a revelation. For months, maybe years, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was asking for too much, if my need for connection and intimacy made me weak or clingy. Danielle had made me feel like my basic human needs were character flaws, like wanting my wife to actually want me back was somehow unreasonable. But Mariah was right. I hadn't been needy. I'd been loyal. I'd been faithful to someone who had emotionally checked out of our marriage and was probably already halfway into someone else's arms. I looked Mariah straight in the eyes then, feeling something shift inside me. Something that had been bent and broken was finally snapping back into place. "I'm not going back," I said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant every word I spoke. She nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "Good." I ended up at this little Airbnb on the other side of town, nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. The kind of place that rented by the week to traveling salesmen and people going through divorces. I guess I fit into that second category now, though the word divorce still felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never learned. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing with texts from Danielle. 3 of them, spaced about an hour apart. The first one said, "Where are you?" Like I was late for dinner instead of having left our marriage the night before. The second was, "You're overreacting," which was so typical of her I almost laughed. And the third, sent around noon, just said, "Seriously?" Seriously. Like my walking away from 13 years of being treated like furniture was some kind of joke. Like my pain was just another inconvenience in her perfectly curated life. I stared at those messages for a long time, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to explain everything, to write some long message about how lonely I'd been, how invisible she'd made me feel, how her casual cruelty the night before had been the final straw. But then I realized she already knew all of that. She'd been watching me struggle for months, maybe years, and hadn't cared enough to change anything. So I didn't reply. I deleted the messages and went about my day. Around 3 in the afternoon, Mariah texted to check on me. Brought me coffee and sat in the little kitchenette while I told her about Danielle's messages and my decision not to respond. "There's more," she said quietly, and my stomach dropped. "I think she's been seeing Derek. No proof," she explained, but enough clues that even a blind man would start to wonder. The late nights at the gym that didn't match their posted hours. Getting dressed up for errands that took hours. Lying about who she was with when friends called to verify plans. But here's the weird thing. I didn't feel the rage I expected. Instead, I felt clarity washing over me like cool water. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No more second-guessing. No more wondering if I was overreacting or being too sensitive. I picked up my phone and called a divorce lawyer. The woman who answered had this matter-of-fact tone that somehow made the whole thing feel less devastating and more like a business transaction, which was exactly what I needed. "I need to dissolve my marriage," I told her, and hearing those words come out of my mouth felt surreal. 13 years reduced to a legal procedure, but that's what it had become. Not out of spite or some desperate attempt to hurt Danielle back, but because I finally understood that some things can't be fixed. You can't perform CPR on a relationship where one person has already emotionally flatlined, and trying to resuscitate something that's already dead just makes you die a little bit too. The lawyer walked me through the practical steps with professional efficiency. I needed to protect myself financially, she explained, because things could get messy once Danielle realized I was serious about this. So I went to the bank that afternoon and moved half our savings into a separate account, not to screw her over, but to make sure I could survive whatever chaos might come next. I closed the credit cards we shared, called the insurance company to understand what would happen to our policies, even started a list of who would get what when we divided up 13 years' worth of accumulated stuff. It felt strange, taking these concrete steps to dismantle a life I'd spent so long building. like I was an archaeologist carefully excavating the remains of something that had once been alive and thriving. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't second-guessing every decision or wondering if I was making some terrible mistake. I was finally choosing myself, and that felt like the most radical thing I'd done in a decade. The paperwork, the phone calls, the logistics, none of it felt overwhelming the way I'd always imagined divorce would. Maybe because by the time you get to that point, the emotional work is already done. The hardest part wasn't filing the papers. It was accepting that the woman I'd loved had stopped being that person a long time ago. 2 days later, just as I was starting to settle into this new reality, Danielle showed up at the Airbnb. I heard her car pull into the gravel driveway, that familiar sound of her engine that I'd been hearing for years when she came home from work. My heart did this stupid little jump before my brain reminded me that she wasn't coming home to me. She was coming to try to control the narrative, to manage the situation, to make this whole thing go away so she could get back to her comfortable routine. Her footsteps crunched across the gravel, and then came that soft knock on the door, the same gentle rhythm she'd always used at home when she was trying to wake me up or get my attention. When I didn't answer immediately, the knocking got more insistent, more demanding. "Marcus, I know you're in there," she called through the door, and I could hear that edge in her voice that meant she was starting to get frustrated. "We need to talk." I sat on the couch, maybe 10 feet from where she was standing, and watched her shadow move back and forth across the window. She was pacing, probably trying to figure out the right words to make me come back, the right combination of explanation and apology that would get things back to normal. But I'd spent too many years listening to her words while her actions told a completely different story. She knocked again, harder this time, and I could hear the frustration really creeping into her voice as she realized I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Part of me wanted to open that door, to hear whatever explanation she'd prepared, to give her the chance to try to fix things. But I learned something important over the past few days. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to participate in conversations that will only hurt you more. She stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, knocking periodically and calling my name, her voice cycling through different tones, concerned, then irritated, then almost pleading. Eventually, the sound stopped, and I heard her car start up and drive away. I watched through the window as her taillights disappeared around the corner and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. That night, I slept without the weight of rejection pressing down on my chest, without wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could fix things. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be loved. I was learning to love myself. And that felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for.